To the Bryant Neighborhood Organization Assembly. So we have a big agenda today, and we also had an exciting panel once again. So today, we're going to be talking about nonprofits and white supremacy. My name is Malik. I'm the chair of Bryant Neighborhood Organization. Steph over there is the vice chair. We're going to do a round of introductions later as we go through the agenda. So we have terms and assembly agreements today. We're going to talk about people power is the purpose. We're going to go through our guiding community principles. We're going to have our exciting panel up here, and Sandra Richardson is going to do our moderating. We're going to go through a series of questions, and we're going to take a real deep look into, this is going to be kind of a part one, part two, so we're going to take a real deep look into nonprofits and white supremacy. And then once again, we're going to go into our breakout groups. And we're going to keep it pretty timely today because we're kind of watching out for some rain here, but we're going to be just fine. So we've done it before, we'll do it again. So as I'm going through this, we're going to go through once again our principles or our agreements. So here, once again, are the common community agreements. I'm going to read them aloud, and then after I'm done reading them, and we've done this before, raise your hand. So first one, depersonalize and speak your truth. Step up, step back. Acknowledge lived experience. Experience is priority. Be in a safe, brave zone, safe, brave space. Cell phones off or on buzz. Listening without interrupting. Side conversations are distracting. There will be time to connect. Recognize privilege. Clarify jargon and abbreviations. Be mindful of language. Have courageous conversations. Request them on the side if you need to talk on the side. We do snaps here. You can clap or snap. Acknowledge impact, not just my intentions. Lean into discomfort. All right. Hands for agreement on these common agreements. Yes, thank you. Okay, I'm going to read off some terms real quick. And once again, these terms are online. If you don't have them, we'll send them out. One important thing is, so there's a couple of things that are going to be coming up soon. So we will have a survey for next time and for our next Saturday, and it's very important that you fill out that survey. But today, it's very important that you fill out the sign-up sheet. So please fill up the sign-up sheet, even if you filled it out before. We need those names. So here are the anti-racism terms and definitions. I'm going to read off a couple of them. The first one is, and the one that we read off the most, is racism. Race prejudice plus power. Racism is belief that a particular race is superior or inferior to another and has the power to enforce that belief. White supremacy, the belief and practice that white people are superior to those of all other races, especially the black race, and should therefore dominate society. Internalized racial superiority, the acceptance of and acting out of a superior definition is rooted in a historic designation of one's race. Over many generations, this process of empowerment and access expresses itself as unearned privileges, access to institutional power, and invisible advantages based on race. Internalized racial oppression, the acceptance of and acting out of an inferior definition of self given by the oppressor and is rooted in the historical designation of one's race. Over many generations, this process of disempowerment and disenfranchisement expresses itself in self-defeating behaviors. Last one. Cognitive dissonance, the state of having inconsistent thoughts or beliefs or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioral decisions and attitude change. Example, white people ignoring all the evidence that suggests institutions such as policing were designated to uphold racial poverty, not public safety, although white mainstream America still pushes reform and the a few bad apples narrative. Once again, these definitions are online. And so I'm going to pass it to the brother now to go over our guide for the people the people power is the purpose, and to go over our guiding community principles. Marjaan.
Malik. Thanks for joining us. Good morning, everybody. My name is Marjaan. I live here in the neighborhood right around the corner. I've been here 13 years, and I just want to kind of ground us in this conversation while we're here. And we are here not because George Floyd was murdered by the police, but because the city was lit on fire. There was an uprising, right? People were pissed off. And there's a lot of folks that want to steal agency away from the uprising and the people who are grieving. They want to blame it on outside agitators. That's a lie. There's a few outside agitators, but they're not the ones who lit the city on fire. It was people who were pissed the hell off at the terrorists who continuously murder black people in our community with impunity, right? That's why we're here. It's because a lot of us didn't want our neighborhood to burn down, right? And many of us realize, or some of us, I should say, know that it could be us. George Floyd, that incident could have been me, right? So we invited the community to come and have these big community-wide conversations, but not about protecting our private property. If we're gonna protect this community, we have to come together and we got to build solidarity, right? Because nobody's safe till black people are safe. I'm going to keep saying it. If black people can get murdered with impunity, anybody can. Word is bond, right? And y'all, you know, we have to understand this, that all of our lives are at risk. Black folks have been the easy scapegoat, but those days are over. Candace Montgomery from Black Vision, she was on our panel last week. She said, if we're talking about defund the police, that means we're stepping up to be leaders in our community. Who's ready to be a leader? All right. So part of this process is about reclaiming our power and taking it from these politicians, these bureaucrats, and these terrorists who created this arrangement, this crisis, right? If anybody's confused, these politicians created this crisis and they're ready to create another one. If we go back to complacency, if we go back to not paying attention, they're going to create these conditions all over again. They got the brother murdered and they got our city destroyed, right? So if we're not stepping up to be leaders, we know how this movie ends, right? But we can create our own movie. So, with that said, we're bringing folks together for these large conversations. Then we're asking our community here around the East 38th Street corridor to break up into block groups to organize with their blocks. We had an amazing block meeting 2 days ago on Thursday. My neighbor Scott, he facilitated it. My neighbor Hallie, came through with some great ideas, and folks have a really dope blueprint for a block organizing program that we're excited to share with folks soon. So if folks need support on getting these block meetings going, BNO just hired 2 organizers. They're not here today, but hopefully they'll be here next weekend to be introduced to the community. So we got to get that going so we can really start organizing, because at the end of the day, the only way to reclaim the power is to organize with everybody. We have to build these relationships. We have to break down these barriers. We need racial solidarity. Black folks can't win liberation on our own. There's not enough of us in this country, especially in this city. Right? And black folks did not create racism and white supremacy. White folks did. Right? The elite created it, and the rest of us uphold it and maintain it. So we all have a role to play, right? And it's survival for all of us. If we do not dismantle white supremacy, even white folks can get got, right? So if you don't have enough power within this system, if you're not white, male, cisgender, Christian with money, then you have less power within that system, right? So even white folks can get displaced from this community. So we have to understand that. And if we're not being proactive in organizing, then, you know, this community is subject to change at the whim of the people that own it. So, with that said, I'm gonna ground us in some foundational organizing principles, and then we're gonna start with this panel discussion. But 4 principles that we've been organizing around. Number 1 is all Black lives matter. If you're born here, you're born somewhere else, don't matter. If you're gay, straight, bisexual, cisgender, transgender, your life matters. Poor Black folks matter. Black folks in prison matter. Homeless Black folks on the street matter. You know, the folks that we want to avoid and cross the street, right? Some of us might have crossed the street when we saw George Floyd walking. Until we really understand that, we're gonna keep drilling this in your heads. All Black lives matter. Listen to Black folks. That's the work we've been doing in this community. When gentrification was getting very aggressive in the last 10 years, we started listening to Black folks, and they got a lot to say. They might not show up and participate in these meetings for various reasons, but Black folks got a lot to say. And the third one is break bread with your neighbor, right? Poverty drives crime. And oppression, white supremacy drives poverty. So if we learn to put the resources where the needs are, we can begin to close these gaps in our communities, in our city. And then the last principle is community accountability. We all have biased perspectives based in our experiences. I'm Black, Muslim, straight. I grew up poor, right? So I don't have the perspective of women. I need women to hold me accountable and help me see bigger, right? I need queer folks around me to hold me accountable. So we got to build community accountability, and we got to pull people in. We can't cancel everybody, right? We can't push people out, right? If we don't begin to organize our youth and offer them something better, the Bloods will. The Latin Kings will. The neo-Nazis will. If we don't engage white kids, white supremacists will, right? Former police officers, hey, if we truly believe in restoration, there's a role for them to play too, right? We have to pull them in, otherwise somebody else will. All right, y'all, so again, this conversation, it's much bigger than the police. We're gonna keep saying that, right? So we have to call them what they are. We have to understand what their true function is in the society, but we also have to understand who created them and why, right? These white liberals who run this town, the DFL, their true bosses are the corporations. Target, Wells Fargo, US Bank. And the police are a tool for them to wield to carry on their agenda of extracting the wealth from the people who are brought here to do the extracting. First it was Black folks, now it's immigrants, mostly Latinos. So we got to understand this arrangement. This arrangement is flawed. It is corrupt to its core. And if we're not serious about changing that arrangement, there's always going to be a need for police, whatever we call them. Doesn't matter. So if we're serious about uprooting white supremacy, patriarchy, and correcting all the problems racial capitalism has caused, we have to understand this bigger picture. So we got a beautiful panel that's going to make some of these connections. Thank y'all for coming. I'm going to pass it back to Malik.
Okay, we have a great panel, and I'm going to pass it off to Sandra as the moderator for this panel. First of all, let's give a round of applause for the panel. And then let's give a round of applause for being here today. Okay, so here's our panel. So we have Sandra Richardson with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. Caty Royce, co-director of Frogtown Neighborhood Association. Art Serotoff, former manager of Sabathani and United Way. And I'll be on the panel as well. I'm Malik, and I'm with Bryant Neighborhood Organization. So let's get started.
No comment. My name is Sandra Richardson, and my connection to this community is that I'm from here. I grew up a block away from here on 40th and Oakland. I bought a house that I still own on 38th in Portland, and now I live in what I call South Bryant. Some people call
Yeah, that's right.
you know, on the other side of 42nd Street. And so I am connected to this part of the world in a way that I'm not connected to any other. And so I'm really happy to be here today. And I'm really happy that we're starting to have this dialogue. The last few weeks we've been talking pretty specifically about the police. And that's a vital conversation. But we have to recognize that the police are part of a system. And none of those institutions within that system are operating independently. Malik Marjaan has just kind of laid the overview, but we want to talk today specifically about nonprofits and white supremacy. My own background is that I spent most of my working career in nonprofits and social service agencies. I spent 6 years as the program manager of family resources at Sabathani, but most of the time I worked for nonprofits, I worked with families and single women and some single men who were homeless. And I did that for more than 20 years. And I got into it because I really believed that no one deserved to be on the street. Everybody deserved to have a place to live. Everybody deserves to have a roof over their head. And for those of us who are old enough to remember, in the 80s and early 90s, people in Minnesota were dying outside in the wintertime. Dying because they didn't outside in the wintertime. And so I joined the movement to end homelessness. And 20 years later, I had a career There was more people homeless in the Twin Cities than ever before, and we had institutionalized homelessness. And I couldn't believe that that had happened and that I had been a part of it. But I had, and I was, and I'm saying that because who works for a nonprofit right now? Okay, who's worked for a nonprofit at some point? Okay. So part of this discussion, when we start to talk about how institutions are connected, a lot of times we want to look at our own individual institution and say, oh, no, we're good. We do good for people. We help people. And you can help and harm at the same time. And so we're asking you, if you work for a nonprofit, especially a social service agency, or you have, and you love that organization, we're not asking you to give that up, but we're asking you to set that to the side and also be willing to look critically at that organization and to do some reevaluation. And with that, I'm going to let the rest of the panel introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their own experiences. Oh, in addition to working in social services, I forgot, I was also a consumer. So I used services at Sabathani. I used energy assistance. I got rental assistance. I am old enough that Miss Walker sat in the basement of Sabathani smoking her cigarettes and doing my taxes. Okay? And so, you know, we don't always think about the ways that we are consumers, especially if we're used to being in the role of provider. So I'll turn it over to Arthur.
Hi there. Can you hear me? Okay. Funny thing, I also live in South Bryant. And we live in 4524 Columbus, but I've been active primarily in the Central and the Bryant neighborhoods for probably 25 years. And a lot of that had to do with my work at Sabathani. I worked there for 16 years. And I worked, sorry, it's just closeness. Yeah, sorry. I worked for a man named, I was hired by a man named Jim Cook, and he was the executive director of Sabathani in 1996. And Jim was the director since 1980. I worked there for 16 years as the programs director. So all the programs that Sabathani did, and at that time there were 6, and we had about 50 staff, ended up reporting to me, and I was responsible for those programs and providing resources for those programs. The program directors didn't need supervision about telling them what to do. They knew all that. So my main work was connecting them to other resources and trying to run interference so that they could do their jobs better and serve the community better. So that's before Sabathani, I was the funding director for the United Way in Minneapolis. And again, at that time, the United Way funded about 120 organizations and spent about $35 million. And I supervised that. What's interesting, what Sandra said, I was at United Way when the emergency in this community was declared regarding homelessness. That was 20 years ago. The emergency is 20 years old. Hey, so something doesn't add up here, right? So we're going to be talking about that, and I'll turn it back over to Sandra.
I'm going to pass it to Katie, but before I do, I just wanted to say, it turns out we're working with one mic today, so if you can't hear us, somebody wave or somebody else. Okay, thank you.
All right, there we go. Can you hear me? In the back? My name's Caty Royce. I live right over on 40th and Elliott. I've lived there for 30 years. Own a house. My grandma passed away, and as generational white wealth works, I was able to purchase my home using her money. And I grew up 2 kids in that house, while one's still there growing up, just about 20. And I've worked in 20, yes. And I've worked in nonprofits my entire career. Right out of college, went into the Peace Corps, was in the Peace Corps for 3 years, came back and started working for nonprofits, and always a community organizer. And administrative now as I get older, doing more of the administrative crap. But still in community organizing, have always worked for grassroots community organizations. I worked for Catholic Charities for about a year and a half, and I had to quit before I got fired. And that was actually the reason they hired me at the Community Stabilization Project, is because I was about to be fired from Catholic Charities. for ridiculous reasons. I ran a women's employment program. Yeah, we met many moons ago. Worked for a women's employment program. It was a pre-employment program. Women basically coming off the streets. It was right on University Avenue. They were trying to work their ways off the street. And so I let them come through many rounds. It was a 16-week program. And Catholic Charities started to say that their funders, which I think included the United Way, was saying they can only go through once. You can't have repeats in your class. And I said, well, there will be repeats, and that's the way I could prove that that the women were actually gaining strength through each time. So I just ignored them and ignored that rule, and then I was about to get booted. So then I went to the Community Stabilization Project, which was a community, basically a housing organizing project, stopping demolitions and gentrification from 20 years ago. It was a majority people of color on the board, and a majority people of color staff. And I was kind of knowing I was white at that point, but not as much as I should have. And that's for damn sure, and you could attest to that. And so worked from Community Stabilization Project, and then went and did a couple of, tried consulting, which really felt bizarre for me as a white person to be out consulting on issues that involved communities of color without having a base. So I quit and got hired again at the Frogtown Neighborhood Association, which is where I am now. And all I can say about nonprofits is they can very easily become generators of the same problems that face our society and our BIPOC communities, unless you're extremely intentional about not having that happen. And that intentionality, because we're constant, anything we do against white supremacy, any work has to be constant, because it is the underpinnings of everything we experience, well, that people of color experience, and white people. The pain and the distress that comes from being perpetrators, whether you're knowing you're a perpetrator or not, is deep and abiding. And so that constant push back on those systems is a necessity, especially if you're working for nonprofits and supposed to be doing work that is generating answers to our community's worst problems, not continuing them.
This is going to be interesting. Okay. So Malik, so my beginnings with nonprofits. So I came out of the University of Minnesota Morris, West Central Minnesota. Went into nonprofits in 1996 at 22. Started working for the AFL-CIO and some of the unions. Worked on 9 campaigns at one time for 6 months. Then went over and got a position with AmeriCorps, which is the Peace Corps in America. So that position landed me in Illinois with American Red Cross and their disaster services, emergency services unit, which it was a twofold thing. So we were supposed to be preparing communities for getting ready for a disaster. And Chicago is an area that has 3 to 5 fires a day. So we were always, so it's like one part, we were supposed to be developing capacity, the other part, response, right, at night. I was a night responder, but I was also an AmeriCorps leader. I had 15 members that I managed up and around the state. So here's the thing that I want to talk about really quickly about Red Cross. So Red Cross, so nonprofits started in the 1900s. Really sort of a response to women's rights, child labor laws, and a number of nonprofits came out of that time. Really, the government sort of getting involved in social welfare issues. And then American Red Cross, I know Art's going to take us through some of this history as well, and we're going to have sort of a conversational style here. So 1940s is American Red Cross. And the thing about Red Cross is a responding agency, right? I love Red Cross, but at the end of the day, it puts Band-Aids on problems. It's not meant for folks to have self-reliance in communities. So we were embedded in South Side and West Side communities where a lot of these fires were happening. But here's what I saw at night. So I was sort of protected by my AmeriCorps status, right? Couldn't fire me. You needed the state to fire me. But what I saw was a lot of white volunteers that were doing disaster services at night. They got practice on what it meant to doling out limited resources to Black and brown communities. So I would watch them. So the way the Red Cross works is your place burns down or you get hit by some kind of disaster, and then you get, if you're lucky and your fire happens on a weekend, you get 2 to 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, for you get a hotel room and feeding, right? If it doesn't, then you may get 24 hours. Now, there was a time when Red Cross used to give you a week. But you can see what's happening there, right? So now you're getting free training on how to be an oppressor. You get to come into the area, tell people what they get, sort of analyze their situations, and then it's like, it is internalized racial superiority on steroids right at your doorstep after you've lost everything. Now, we were a Black-led chapter. Chicago was a Black-led chapter, and it was actually Black-led by the state. But when it comes to that ARC that's over in Falls Church, Virginia, where Red Cross is based, that's all top-down white, right? So that's the thing that I got to see. And then I went into neighborhood associations, which we all know the possibilities of neighborhood associations right now. Those neighborhood associations, we're not living up to our full potential. So the difference between Red Cross and where I am right now is that now I'm a part of a nonprofit in Bryant, where we are trying to live up to our full potential. So you can imagine what it's like to be in this interesting thing of two worlds. One that keeps things in place and that propagates gatekeeping, all the way to an organization that's trying to break gatekeeping.
I'm going to pass it back to Art to go a little bit more into the history of nonprofits in this country. I am a team member of the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And one of the things that we are real strong about is that if you are looking to undo or dismantle something, then you need to have an understanding about how it was created and how it was structured. Because a lot of times what happens is that something happens like the murder of George Floyd, and then now it's emergency, okay? And so there's a lot of activity for a short period of time, and people throw money or resources or whatever, but there's not an understanding of what's already there, and there's no understanding of how it came to be. So when we want to talk about nonprofits, I want to go back to the beginning and talk about how the system was created and why. This is going to be a little bit back and forth because we only have one mic today. And we had kind of envisioned this as a conversation, but we're still going to have a conversation. We just are going to be a little bit more creative about it. Okay? All right. Okay.
Well, again, when I worked for United Way, I thought of myself as working in the belly of the beast. And I've heard a bunch of us talk about our experiences in these nonprofits, and there's a thread that runs all the way through that, and that's what I think we want to emphasize. That thread is, Marjaan used the word corrupt a little bit ago, that organizations that have these wonderful missions and on the surface want to do good and say they want to do good in the community are in fact acting as agents of the oppressor. And some of us, I've worked 40 years in this business. So also, as you said, Marjaan, there's cognitive dissonance. Because on the one hand, we really do want to do good. And on the other hand, a lot of what we call standard operating procedures, the rules, the policies, hamper us, hobble us, don't let us do what we need to do, that we know what we need to do. So think about this. Now, and what we're talking about in our experience is a teeny tiny fraction of what's more broadly known as the nonprofit sector. Because the nonprofit sector, most of it is stuff like hospitals, think Mayo Clinic, think Southdale, think the Atlanta Health Systems, and also stuff like the Ordway, the Minneapolis Institute of Art, some colleges. And so they got the big money, and the social service agencies have a really tiny fraction of that. But those are the ones that a lot of us have ended up working at because we wanted to do good in the community. And this is what, so let's go all the way back. I just saw Hamilton on Disney a little while ago. And back in the colonial days, and this, people wanted to take care of themselves, right? And they wanted to take care of people in the community that weren't doing so well. So they set up mutual aid societies, but all of a sudden, the stuff got codified. The people that were running the colonies, the property owners, you know a little bit about property in the colonies? Land and human beings. The property owners wanted to codify this stuff. They brought with them what was called the Elizabethan Poor Laws. And what's interesting about those things to me was, I ain't gonna go into a whole long thing, but yeah, no. Was they distinguished between deserving and undeserving poor. So all of a sudden, you got a division, and some people get help and some people don't. Sound familiar? That was 400 years ago. So, Elizabethan rules. In the 1800s, jumping to the 1800s, right? From 16 to 18. We're going to move along real quick, though. There were people, 1800s, also characterized by the industrialization, child labor, exploitation of workers, and a big event known as the Civil War happened in there, and descendants of Africans were so-called emancipated. So around in the middle of the 1800s, we got a lot of people all over the United States that are working, 15 hours a day, 14, 13 years old, throwed off some land and don't know which way to go or where to go or how to get reemployed in a gainful way, poorly educated, got all this stuff. Some nice rich people like Jane Addams, some of you may remember that name, started what they called settlement houses. First one was in Chicago. It was called Hull House. And they were supposed to do good things for people that were indigent, needed the education, had abusive working conditions, and so on. And these sprang up all around the country. Also, in the late 1800s, we got another wave of needy people known as immigrants. In particular, immigrants from Eastern Europe and also Southern Italians, Eastern European Jews. Millions came to this country in a 40-year span, 1880 to 1920. So you had all these people and settlement houses that were started with a good intention by the patrons, started as using their largesse, their resources to help these folks assimilate into the culture and the structure of the United States. And what I mean by assimilate, they taught the immigrants English. They taught certain work skills. They even taught certain assembly skills. So that people, but they also taught here's compliance, here's how you follow the rules, and here's how you could be a good employee. So in fact, they were training grounds for the people that actually started them, their businesses. So that people would end up to be, the people that come through there, end up to be nice, compliant workers. Some of them, fast forwarding to the 30s, didn't buy all of that. And during the 30s, we remember that 1929 was the Great Depression. So a lot of those people, many of them, most of them, lost their jobs. And there was also great unrest in this country because the compliance apparently wasn't working for them. There were strikes all over this country. Minneapolis was shut down in 1934 by what they call the general strike, organized by the Teamsters and joined by many others. They shut this city down. Now, those folks that own the businesses don't like that. They get nervous. And they get nervous also because in the early 1900s, 1917, there was a communist revolution in Russia. So there was a state that was communist, antithetical to what they're trying to do. And they worry about this stuff, so they got to get these folks back in line. Luckily, World War II, luckily in this case, for them. This is all a give and take back and forth between those that own the means of production and those who they need to work in those means of production, and confusing that with doing good in the community. So there's some, Marjaan called it corrupt, pervert, and we're working on this, and we're doing both things at the same time. And that's the consistent thread. 501c3 or nonprofit, it's a tax status, right? That's what it is. It's taxes. Now, most often, at least from what I can tell, the tax codes are set up to benefit who? Not me, not you, but to benefit those owners. And so, actually, in 1913 was the first income tax. And in 1913, they declared certain kinds of businesses exempt. 1913. And those were, and I just want to take a look at this real quick, religious, charitable, scientific, or educational. And then in succeeding years, all kind of other things were added to that list of what's exempt. So these organizations, supposedly doing good stuff, set up by the owners were exempt from taxes. That's good for them, ain't it? In 1935, when we had all of this unrest in the middle of the Depression, it was modified so that 15% of the corporate income could be given to these charitable institutions without being taxed. Would reduce their income and they wouldn't be taxed on it. What's kind of nice, they like that. No, they liked it so much that they set up all kind of charitable institutions on their own, with their own names, with corporate names as well. And in 1954, they modernized the tax code and said, wait a minute, if you're going to have all these foundations, you need to at least spend, get this, 6% of your assets on charitable work. Otherwise, they'd be sitting on it, right? Earning more money through their investments, and now you got to spend at least 6%. So the thing that I want to emphasize is that all of a sudden, from an idea of a community taking care of itself for many, many, many years, for forever, right? It became a corporation. Our organizations, our institutions, bar none, no matter who you work for, and no matter how much good you think you're doing, was set up to benefit a property elite, and still does. That's right. I can go into more little dates and this and that, but I'm not going to bother with that. That's what this is about. And if we even take a deeper dive, which I think we're going to see how the corporate structure of these things preserves that same stuff and functions in the community in this same way. So all of us that worked there, including me and Sabathia, we did terrific stuff, are also complicit and perpetrators in the same way. And I'll just let
I just want to add a couple things before we move on, because all of this is true, but race was always in there. So by 1640, the concept of white first appears. And so you don't just have immigrants coming over and assimilating into life in America. They're assimilating into an identity. Okay? And that's not an identity that's open to everyone. At the same time that you have philanthropic organizations, settlement houses starting for white people, you don't have that same thing happening for Black and brown people. After emancipation, there was the Freedmen's Bureau, which was supposed to help Black people, and I also think poor white people, become acclimated, gain land, find lost relatives, and become full members of society. That lasted 7 years. It was underfunded and under-resourced the entire time. And from 1865 to 1872, and by 1872, almost all the land had reverted back to the, I won't say original owners, I'll say previous owners of the Confederacy. And so there has always been a division of not just who's deserving and who's not deserving, but there's a color line in there too. There's if you look at the tax laws that Arthur talked about, I haven't had time to research it, but I will by next week. There's another modification in 1954. In 1954 was Brown versus Board of Education, and I'm really interested to see how that modification, because it helped white families establish schools, because there was mass exodus from the public school system in much of the country at that time. So I want to just start for us to have that framework, but to move us along, we just want to talk for a few minutes about how nonprofits are structured, because that contributes to the outcomes that we receive. I don't know who would like to start us off.
I'm no expert, but can you hear me through this mask? Okay. On the structures, I tend to ignore them and break the rules on them, but some that are very important to maintaining accountability when you're being intentional about your work are boards. So are the folks on the board, so nonprofits have boards, and the boards are fiscal guides, the governance, thank you, of nonprofits. And you can have any number of people on your board. You have a mission. You can have people that none of them are affected by the actual issues that you're working on, can be your entire board. And that is true a lot. The Wilder Foundation is probably one of the most egregious, the ones that I despise the most right now for any number of reasons. But they are a bunch of different folks from different corporations that are, and lawyers, that kind of thing. That's who we got on our board. A lot of boards. Community-based boards are different. Bryant Neighborhood's a perfect example. Frogtown Neighborhood Association. It's people who live in the neighborhood and are most impacted by the issues. But that is not true at all. And then the source of funds also, most nonprofits have to go to the philanthropic foundations for their money. Plenty of it comes from individual, but there's this complex, and the nonprofit industrial complex so this really does, the mask make it move down your nose. I didn't realize that. I was watching you always going there, but it definitely is pulling it down. And those foundations are the owners now, right? And they give out the 6% or whatever amount. But they don't just give out money to do whatever you want to do. They've got their own rules, their own guidelines, their own stuff that we have to fit into, which in that fitting into is where you lose the essence of what needs to happen, because that's not what they're telling you to do. Go find your essence in your community. They're not telling you that. They're telling you to work on job development, but doing it this way. So those are some of the structures. You want to talk more about governance? Did I do something that you wanted to talk about the overall structure of how nonprofits are currently structured, because most of them are not structured. Most of them are not structured like that. And so we want to talk about the organizational structure. So, nonprofits have a mission usually. They have a vision. And this is supposed to guide their work. So you're going to share a couple of mission statements of organizations.
I just happen to have a few. So here's one: to provide people of all ages and cultures with essential resources that inspire them to improve their lives and build a thriving community. Good stuff, right? Here's one: to strengthen youth, children, and their families, and to build the capacity of the community we serve. Good one too, huh? You may know this one: to eliminate racism and empower women. Malik, you may know this one: prevent and alleviate human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. And again, I can go on, but you get the idea of what these missions are saying. They're all good words, and they all dedicate the organization to all this stuff, empowerment and strengthening and all that.
Okay.
God, I love you, Katie. So the organization is a collection of resources to arrange and accomplish an overall goal. Who defines the resources and who defines the overall goal? So I'm taking you through a little bit of what Bryant did, right? Because Bryant, when I first got involved, was working like a white homeowners association. At least that's the impression I got when I came in the doors. And then I ran into Steph and Marjaan, and the script got flipped. So thank you. So meet one or more needs in the community. Who defines who those needs are? The overall purpose, the nonprofit carries out the mission statement. Who defines the mission statement? We can define the mission statement, right? I'm reading these off to you because I want you to know about the possibilities, right? I'm happy to go back and forth.
And the reason I'm saying that is, I'll scream. Can you hear me? I used to be able to project, but Malik got me excited because you say, who defines the mission statement? And he says, we can. In 99.9% of nonprofits, who defines the mission statement? The board. Who's on the board? Nobody connected to the community. So they come with the kind of words that I told you. Okay? Malik said we got to respond to the needs in the community. Who defines the needs in the community? Malik says we do. 99.9% of nonprofits, the board again. Or the funders, not the community. So what's going on here? There's a disconnect. They flipped the disconnect for BNO, but in all the other nonprofits, it's standard operating procedure, business as usual.
And perpetually under-resourced and then cut off of funding frequently. So I slammed Wilder, so I just wanted to read their mission statement and then give you an example of why I'm despising them lately. The mission of the Amherst H. Wilder Foundation is to promote the social welfare of persons resident or located in the greater St. Paul metropolitan area by all appropriate means, including relief of the poor, care of the sick and aged. Okay, so Wilder moved their corporate offices from the middle of Frogtown, thank God, because now we have an urban farm on that site, but to Lexington and University when they knew the light rail was coming. So they're there, they got a huge block. Part of the sale of that included a lot that they didn't build on, so it's been used as a big snow pile area for years. And now they are in the midst of, maybe it's gone away because of COVID, but selling that lot for, they won't disclose how much, millions of dollars to a luxury apartment developer by the name of Aladdis. And Aladdis has done some really shitty housing in Minneapolis, and now he's trying to go over to St. Paul. White boy, who worked for Dominion for many years. Dominion is a large, multi-family, all-white organization, developer. So anyway, they're proposing to sell to Lattice for, I think it was 139 units of luxury apartments that tripled the market rent in that area in one fell swoop, which would have devastated Rondo. So that area is the very northern edge of Rondo. And they never once talked to any community members about this decision. So that's the kind of behavior that this board, with the relief of the poor and the care of the sick and all the good things the Ann Hess Wilder Foundation does, that's the kind of corporate behavior that we're experiencing right now, today. Right. Ooh, Wilder. But it's a perfect example of what we're talking about. Oh my God.
So the reason why I was reading off those like boring but yet poignant definitions is that I want you to think about the fact that we have the power, the people power, and the creative imagination to change all those structures. And so what I'm saying to you right now is that we have to think about a radical power analysis of all these different things that we're dealing with right now. So who's running the foundations? Do nonprofits actually support the creation of BIPOC business ventures? They can. Who's running the foundations? Who are the board chairs of these neighborhood associations and district councils over in St. Paul? Who are the executive directors? Like, we can do a full power analysis and a racial equity analysis with an actionable plan that holds these forces accountable. So we can begin to change the programs and policies of how these nonprofits are run. The 501c3 status says that we can only do 16 to 20% of lobbying. But you call anybody, you talk to anybody, and they'll tell you can only do 2%. But that's, once again, somebody creating a box for the tools that we have in our community to do actual radical imagination and direct action. And that's what happens. I've been in nonprofits for 20 years. I can't tell you how many times I've had a board member, doesn't matter what race they are, but particularly white, who actually tell me about how nonprofits are run. I've been executive director twice. But you can see what it is. It's a tool. It's a tool to keep us down. And I'm saying to you, we can affect who are on these boards, who the executive directors are. I used to do these luncheons for executive directors of color and indigenous directors of neighborhood associations in Minneapolis and in St. Paul twice a year. It was all on us over at the University of Minnesota, which I also work for. And oftentimes, nobody even thanked. A lot of times, these organizations are run by women of color. That's kind of the hidden thing, right? Nobody talks about that. But are they paid fairly? No. Are they supported? Does the city even say thank you? And here they are trying to do some of this radical work that we're talking about flipping the script and really holding these foundations accountable to get these foundations to go, yeah, thanks for giving us money right now, but here's the direction we're going, so you guys better catch up, or we're going to find our own way to do it. Because we can affect the What Foundations Fund as well on the ground level. We can do that. But we need to support, if we're actually going to change the structure of these nonprofits, then we're going to need a full racial equity analysis and power analysis of these nonprofits. It has to happen. And we have to have nonprofits that are willing to stop being afraid of addressing their isms, whatever isms they have, particularly racism, but they got to quit running away from it. And it should need a time like this for Mr. George Floyd to be assassinated to start to address the way these nonprofits are running. So I want to throw one more thing out here for the BIPOC directors of neighborhood associations and district councils. They're doing city work, and they should be paid like city staff. Insurance, pensions, 503(c)(b)s, all these things. They need to be supported to do this work. This is long work. If we're going to get generational wealth back, we gotta be playing long ball right now.
Maybe we kind of segued into it, but maybe we can just continue talking about. Sorry, better? Okay. Better. Okay. So I want to talk about how Black and brown communities are impacted when we start to talk. We're talking about the structure, we're talking about the mission. I want to talk about the impact, what happens on the ground, and looking particularly at social service agencies, because right now, that's the vehicle. New and existing nonprofits is the vehicle that's being used to pump money in certain directions in this community. And we have to recognize that a lot of times when money is being pumped through nonprofits, okay, one of the roles that nonprofits have always served is they are a gatekeeper on our community. They're also a way to divert social change. So the resolution that people have now is that this shit isn't going back to what it used to be on May 24th, no matter what. Okay, that energy is being attempted to be diverted into art, into gardening, into a memorial for Mr. Floyd. And none of those are bad things, but they're not social change. And what usually happens at this point is people start to get tired, right? Okay, people start to want quick answers. They want a quick fix. They want this shit to get together so they can go back to doing what they was doing. And we are at a different moment in time. We are not going back. But in order not to go back, we have to be purposeful. We have to be diligent. And we have to be willing to call a thing, even if someone never talks to us again. But this shit isn't going back.
Oh, that's you? Oh, sorry.
You blew. I was on a roll. But I just want to talk about some of the ways that nonprofits affect our communities. And one of them is through youth work in a variety of ways. If you look around our community, the number of organizations and philanthropic concerns that say they're concerned for youth, they want to benefit youth, you know, the youth are our future. The youth are saying, well, what about me right now? In the last 3 years, Sebastian has closed Horizons Youth Program. Urban Arts Academy across the street is closed. Pillsbury is gravely reduced. Urban Boys and Girls Club, even before COVID, had greatly pulled back because of lack of resources. And so we have to look at what happens in our community when we are beholden to philanthropy and they're on a 2-year cycle. And we have to pay attention to the fact that, have you noticed that they can never focus on all the children? They can focus on 0 to 3. They can focus on high 5. They can focus on primary grades, K to 3. We can focus on middle school. We can focus on college prep. But children need support throughout their lives. And philanthropy has lulled us into thinking that there's a magic bullet and that if you hit a kid at just the right time with some services, that everything will be fine. And that's gone on for generations, and it doesn't work. It hasn't worked, but it continues. When Malik is talking about holding philanthropy accountable, that takes organizing. It doesn't take a phone call. It takes organizing, because They are used to calling the shots. It's not in their interest for problems to get solved. One of the things that was really an aha moment for me in terms of working with folks who were homeless and working, like I said, really, really hard because I really was passionate. But I didn't understand. When you institutionalize a problem, you don't intend to solve it. Okay? It is serving a purpose for there to be so many homeless people. And we have to look past the encampment at Powderhorn and what happens to that larger system and who's being served, who is benefiting. Because a lot of people are getting paid. A lot of people who come and work in poor and homeless communities with Black and brown people are financing middle-class lifestyles and sending their kids to college. And so there's nothing wrong with people sending their kids to college, but when there's a certain group that has to remain poor and in need for that to happen, that's a script that needs to be flipped.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. So I think the thing is, like as we're starting to kind of wrap up here, and then I'm going to sort of with Sandra to close this out. I think what we're also looking at too is that we're looking at a creation of something different, and we got to figure out if the nonprofit structure has, if it's run its course, what is that difference? What's that different thing look like? And if we're talking about doing a Black economic corridor at 38th in Chicago, and we're talking about doing a George Floyd Empowerment Center there, then we're going to need some different structures that are going to help to put that in place. And if we're talking about working on something that's going to restore generational health, generational wealth, as well as talking about reparations, we're going to need a different kind of structure. And we all know that the city of Minneapolis and the city of St. Paul has a limited imagination for new structures. So for us and the people in this park right now, we got a lot of imagination here if we're here and we come here religiously every Saturday. So we got to be thinking about what's that new structure that's going to start taking over for nonprofits. So what is it? And we've already laid down some of the tenets at this panel to look at what that is. So if we got the planks right now, then we're going to need some wood and we're going to need a couple other things too to get this going. So I'm happy we did this panel. We're going to do a part 2. But just think about those things that we can define exactly what it is that we're looking for as we're going forward and we start playing long ball. So.
So we have about a half an hour left, and so we want to break into our small groups. And we don't necessarily have a lot of questions. We just want you to have a conversation with each other. In light of this discussion, when you think about your workplace or a nonprofit that you volunteer for, what behaviors, policies, and practices support white supremacy in that organization? And if you don't have an answer, then pay attention this week to what happens in your organization. Because next week, we're going to talk about white organizational culture and how it undermines and maintains white supremacy on the daily. So thank you all for your attention, small groups. We'll come back together, at 5 until? Marjaan? Okay. So we got about 25 minutes. Group leaders?
Okay, calling group facilitators to the front, and then we're going to count. As we're going forward, and as I say, playing long ball, because we got to keep this work going. So we need to make sure this work is being funded by people power, people resources. So with that being said, just 2 things to let you know. So we have a donation box up here. asked me the other day, it's like, why aren't you guys taking donations? Well, you're right, we probably should. So we have a donation box here, and then we also have PayPal. So I'm going to read that off, and it's also on the box as well, so you don't have to wait for me to keep reading it. So that is paypal.me/Bryant, Minneapolis.
MPLS.
I'll say it again. paypal.me/Bryant, MPLS. It's on the front here. It's on our webpage. Give a donation. We need it. This is not charity. This is change. And change has to be funded by the people. With that being said, just a quick commercial break with it. All right. So let's just give you a little example of how that works. Okay. All right. Okay. Great. All right. Let me pass it over to the brother. Thank you. All right. And I got a quick announcement. One of our community leaders, Janelle Austin, dropped off a flyer. They're holding a self-care fair today behind the right next to the Pillsbury Theater on Chicago and what is that, 36?
34.
So free acupuncture, free massages, free chiropractic support, yoga, wellness conversations, lunch, and more, and it goes till 4 p.m. So go get your self-care on. And what, just to quick close us out, what Malik was saying, at the end of the day right now, these neighborhood organizations are tied to city funding. But if we value this work, we will begin to self-fund this work, and then we can tell the city to fuck you. Right? Because we're coming for your jobs, right? We're throwing y'all out of power. Right? This is our neighborhood, this is our city. So with that, we're gonna close out in a chant real quick. And liberation, that's what we're fighting for, right? We're all suffering from white supremacy, racial capitalism, including white folks, like I think it was Sandra who talked, or Caty talked about being perpetrators, whether you know it or not. Has anybody ever heard of a sister revolutionary named Assata Shakur? If you listen to the dominant narrative, they'll tell you she's a terrorist. She's not. She's the counter-terrorist. Just like they tell you Antifa's terrorists. So please repeat after me. There's a beautiful chant that I want us to say and remember. It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win.
It is our duty to win.
We must love and support one another.
We must love and support one another.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
One more time. It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win.
It is our duty to win.
We must love and support one another.
We must love and support one another.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.